Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round young virgin, mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Truly, he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymn of joy, in grateful chorus raise we, for all within us praise his holy name. Christ is the Lord, oh praise his name forever, his power and glory evermore proclaim. His power and glory forevermore proclaim. His power and glory forevermore proclaim. Welcome back to My Seminary Life. I'm your host, Brandon Knight, and today we are going to be wrapping up our series, Hymns of Christmas. This has been a six-part, are we on episode 5 or 6? I think we're on episode 5. 5-part series as we have journeyed through the birth of Jesus, guided by our favorite Christmas hymns. Last week was the final sermon. This has been a sermon series I have been doing alongside these podcast episodes during my residency with the Church of Hessville. Last week was the final sermon that is correlated to this series, but there was still one more topic I wanted to cover. Last week, really hit home this idea of the good news, the gospel of Christmas is that God is faithful. And that through that faithfulness, we have hope in our longing. We have rest in the chaos. We are given a song to sing and a message to declare, a testimony to declare of his faithfulness. There's still one other element to this message of good news, to this message that God is faithful. And that's why we're here today for one more kind of bonus edition of this series. This was, I kept one in the chamber, basically. It was like if the church decided that they wanted to do a Christmas Eve service or a candlelight service, I had one on hand just in case, but it's still a pretty important topic. Throughout this series, each episode has had a main focus hymn that would guide us on our journey, plus a B-side track for the exception of that week when we looked at the portion of Luke chapter 2 where the angels appeared to the shepherds. That one got a bonus track because there's just so many songs about that one particular part of the Christmas story. Today, we're looking at a through line, something that has come up throughout this journey, both in the passages of Scripture we've been looking at and also in most of the hymns that we've covered already, plus more. This is a reoccurring theme throughout many of the Christmas hymns and through the Christmas story. And based off of the two hymns that I've chose today, Silent Night and O Holy Night, you may assume that I'm going to now talk about holiness, the holiness of God, and all the Reformed bros in the back nodded their head. Yes, holiness. Look, I know I make a lot of jokes at the expense of the Theo bros, the Reformed bros, but to their credit on this one, I do agree that holiness is like the central characteristic of God, but that is not what we're here to talk about today. Because though that is a theme that comes up in both of the hymns that I chose here, Silent Night and O Holy Night, you may also have noticed a key difference in the opening spoken word, because throughout this series, I have always quoted the first verse of these hymns. That is not the case with O Holy Night. I did not do the first verse. No, I didn't do verse 1. I actually did verse 3. Because this reoccurring theme that comes up in the Christmas story as we've been journeying through the birth of Jesus, and so many of these hymns, is this concept of peace. That Jesus is peace. And this is that final, very crucial part of the good news of Christmas, is Jesus is peace. The Messiah is peace. Because let's recall what we have seen so far. Because, like I said, peace somehow comes up in like all of these hymns, right? We have scripturally, we go back all the way to that first episode talking about longing for the Messiah in Micah chapter 5, verse 5, that first line. Remember, that was like this big, still to this day within Judaism debated line, and he shall be their peace. Is that a peace as in he will bring domestic peace, a secure border, keeping out all the enemies? Or is this eternal ruler of the line of David, is this person peace incarnate? Is this person peace? And that since that person is peace, this ruler is peace that will come from Bethlehem, that means the people will find their own peace in the fact that their ruler is peace. Then we fast forward to the actual birth account of Jesus there in Luke 2, 1 through 20, right? Specifically, that part when the angels appear to the shepherds, you have the archangel appears, radiance of the Lord, they freak out, chill out, bro. This is good news. Then the choirs of angel armies appears and says, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace with those with whom God finds favor. Then we look at one more critical passage of Scripture that deals with this birth narrative of Jesus, and for that, we actually have to go back to Micah's contemporary, Isaiah. In Isaiah 9:6, he prophesies, for unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty Father, or Almighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So remember, like I said, Isaiah and Micah were contemporaries. Isaiah more of a prophet to the kings, calling for national reform, while Micah was more of a street preacher, street prophet, who was calling for personal social reform. And in both cases, they are declaring a message here of a ruler of peace. And yes, this ruler of peace, apparently, this peace is tied to God's favor, God's grace that he extends to his people, to his kingdom. But Jesus, Messiah, is peace, the ruler of peace. And this is a central part of the good news of Christmas. So when we understand the faithfulness of God here in the story of the birth of Jesus, we have hope in our longing, rest in our chaos, a song to sing, a message to declare, because the Prince of Peace, the ruler of peace, peace incarnate, has come. Peace. The peace of God has come in the form of a baby. God is faithful and has given us peace in the form of Jesus, God incarnate himself. Now, Silent Night, along with Away in a Manger, kind of paints this unrealistic picture, right? Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. Was it really? I guess we don't know. If you've ever been in a birthing situation, you know that it isn't very calm or bright. It isn't very, chill. It's not a very chill environment at all. There's people rushing around everywhere. There's a woman in a lot of pain or very uncomfortable or trying to do something that is crazy, whatever the case may be, and a very scared husband and a very scared partner standing in the corner just hoping for the best and not to get in the way. At least that's how I felt during when Claire had producer Cooper. And it's this song in Away in a Manger really portrays this kind of like unrealistic, like what peace could look like, right? Especially Away in a Manger. There's a reason why we're not covering Away in a Manger at all in this series, and it's because I think it's actually like the worst offender of Christmas heresy, like, because it has that line of no crying he makes, right? Okay, I don't know if you know this, but if a baby doesn't cry upon its arrival into the world, that's a bad thing. Like, at some point in time, there was this theology that was built around this idea that babies crying is a sign of sin. Seriously, like I've had pastors tell me that is a sign of their fallenness and selfishness within them, that they just cry so they can have attention, when in reality babies cry because how else are they supposed to communicate? Really, like seriously, how else are babies supposed to communicate? It's a bad thing if a baby doesn't cry. Now, here with Silent Night, I made the exception because, one, this is the traditional Christmas Eve service, candlelight service hymn that you typically close with. So this would have been the hymn that we focus on if this was a whole sermon I was going to do. But there is something about that closing line to that first verse of sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Like, okay, it was probably the most chaotic day in the life of Mary and Joseph. And as we understand the story, how it's going to go on, it's going to continue to be very chaotic because parenting is very chaotic in general. But, they're going to have to flee to Egypt because Herod's going to start killing all the babies. And this, they're going to lose Jesus in Jerusalem. They don't lose him. They find him, but, they get separated from Jesus when he's like 12 or something. Like we have these few accounts of like life is going to get tumultuous for Mary and Joseph. I can only assume how the conversations, not to get all Mary, did you know about this, but like I can only imagine what the conversations were like for Mary and forever how long Joseph was alive during all of this, when Jesus's like public ministry starts. And people are like, Mary, what's up with Jesus? I thought he was going into the carpentry thing. And now he's walking around as a rabbi calling himself the Son of Man and the Son of God. Like, can you imagine just like what life is tumultuous. Life, there's an absence of peace. And I want to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The reason why I pulled O Holy Night is to counteract the questionable theology and depictions going on here, because O Holy Night is, in my humble opinion, the greatest Christmas hymn. It is the most theologically sound, imagery rich Christmas hymn that we have. I get it that maybe if we're measuring it pound for pound when it comes to theology, maybe Hark the Herald's Angels Sing still is more theologically accurate or has more theology packed into it, but O Holy Night is the greatest Christmas hymn, in my opinion. And it has an interesting history. We'll get into that here in a bit. But, it has this line in the third verse of, and his gospel is peace. So it ties in here this sleep in heavenly peace, his gospel is peace. We have these images here of Jesus being peace, resting in peace, and bringing peace through who he is and what he is going to proclaim and embody. And that brings me to this whole, what I wanted to talk about here of there's just such a lack of peace, right? I mean, the holiday season is just one activity after another. So the idea of peace is probably hard to imagine. Plus, in a world where there's like a couple wars going on and natural disasters and just, the political unrest and the whole thing that's been going on, trying to imagine peace can be very difficult. And to double that, I realized as I was meditating for this episode, when it comes to this idea of, Jesus being our peace, I was trying to reflect on, what does that even look like? What does it look like to be at peace? Because usually when we think about being at peace, it's like a stillness. There's no anxiety. There's no chaos. It's like peace. It's kind of like how darkness is the absence of light. Peace is the absence of chaos. But at the same time, then the image that comes to mind is that peace is like stillness. It's like nothingness in a way. There's nothing going on. Everything is still. And I don't know if that is the correct image of what peace should look like. Jesus is peace incarnate. We find our peace in him. What does that look like for us then to be at peace? And this is one of the reasons why I'm glad this ended up not being a whole sermon, because I don't know if I'm necessarily, this is kind of like the rabbit trail episodes I was doing back in November. Like, this is a little bit more waxing philosophically and theologically, because I don't know exactly what this should look like. Peace is like the absence of chaos. That's a good thing. But is it just like something doesn't exist anymore and everything is at rest? Or does peace look like still some kind of mobility, some kind of action? You know what I mean? Because we all, I've heard before that, like, when something's at peace, you have to then prepare for war or whatever. Like, when things are still, you have to prepare for chaos, right? But it's like when there is actually peace, what happens during that space? Do we not enjoy the peace and we just rush to preparing for when the worst thing could happen? What does it look like to actually be at peace? And maybe this kind of overlaps a little bit with the whole rest in the chaos thing, and a little bit of what I talked about back during the Roots of Sabbath series from, 2 Januaries ago now, of just like understanding what it means to rest in Jesus and finding our stillness in him. One reason why I also pulled O Holy Night is because that third verse where the line, his gospel is peace, is contained, is very social justice focused. I mean, that probably wasn't the term that they would have used back then, admittedly, but chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. So we have this like baked into this section where we're talking about Jesus, the gospel, the good news that Jesus brings is peace. We also see the end of injustice. We see slavery and bonds being broken. And we could probably spin that as just, it's just spiritual chains that are being broken. It's not. We'll get to that in the history part of this hymn. But this has been like what's been on my mind as I've been preparing for this episode of, what does it look like to actually be at peace? Is it just an absence of chaos, a stillness, a restfulness? What does that look like day to day then? What does it look like to not be anxious? What does it look like to actually take what Jesus says of, the don't worry, the flowers don't worry about how they look, and they look great. Solomon in all of his glory, can't compare. Or Paul talking about be anxious for nothing. Like, what does it actually look like to be at peace? I don't know what it actually looks like to be at peace. Like maybe I've had glimpses of it throughout my life. It's not like I'm constantly living in a state of anxiety. At least not anymore. I'm on medication now. But like, what does it look like to Jesus is peace. We are followers of Jesus. He is our peace. Micah 5:5. He has brought us peace because God has shown favor to us. He is the Prince of Peace. So then what does that look like in day to day, in my relationship with him? So there's one thing I want to do here to kind of wrap this up, because as I've looked at this idea of at least, the stillness, the end of chaos, this kind of thing, right, as part of what it means to find our peace in Jesus, I want to do a honestly kind of bold. I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be hip and trendy, but definitely not something that is typically advised to do on a audio format. But there was one time I saw something done on television that was very bold and very transformative to me, and I've always wanted to mirror it, and I think this is my best chance to do it. On the beloved children's program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, there's an episode where, of course, Yo-Yo Ma stops by the neighborhood to put on a concert because it's PBS, and Yo-Yo Ma was on literally every PBS show at some point. And so Mr. Rogers goes to the concert. He talks to Yo-Yo Ma about his career as a musician and learning to play the cello, and get to listen to the music. And we come, the concert's over. He goes back to his home, and he's talking to the children. Mr. Rogers, he's talking to the children watching the show, and he goes, we heard a lot of really good music today. Let's just take a moment and think about it. And then he stops and just looks at the TV for what feels like an eternity, but was probably only like 5 to 10 seconds. And he just sits there and smiles and takes a moment in real time to reflect on this beautiful piece that he heard Yo-Yo Ma play. And that is a daring and bold thing to do on television, even if it is scripted in, because one of the golden rules of broadcasting is no dead air, right? Especially with radio. You don't want there to be nothing. There has to be something going on. Well, with this idea that Jesus brings us peace, that Jesus is peace, the gospel is peace, that we can, just like Jesus, sleep in heavenly peace at the end of a day because he is peace, the ruler of peace. He is our peace. With those things in mind, I want to take a moment now for us to be at peace. I want us to stop and reflect on that. And, usually in the podcast world, it would be some kind of pause the episode and, do it for yourself. No, we're going to do it right now. May the peace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. And you're supposed to say, and also with you. But I'll just act like I heard you say it. Okay, so let's get into the history of these two hymns now, starting first with our main guide for this episode, Silent Night. Silent Night was written by a man named Joseph Moore. Joseph Moore grew up poor and basically fatherless. His dad was a soldier, and so he spent most of his life with his mother and grandmother. But he did have a church father. He did have a church father, and not in the sense of like Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas or anything like that, but the choir master at his local church took him under his wing. And I love that. I really do. I love when elderly people step in to like shepherd a child to the point of becoming like fake grandparents or fake aunt and uncle. I had Uncle Marty and Aunt Carol when I was a little kid, who was not even remotely related to my family, but they were just a sweet older couple who showed the love of Jesus to me because I was there, essentially, you know? So this choir master at his church shepherded him, performed kind of the fatherly role in Joseph's life. In 1815, he was ordained as a priest and served in many parishes throughout Austria. He throughout his ministry was greatly loved, but he sadly died in poverty. He grew up in poverty and died in poverty. And he died in poverty because he spent most of his money on children and widows to make sure that they were taken care of, the children getting a good education, that widows could be fed and taken care of. So he died in poverty because he was generous and loving and, saw that compassion from his choir master. So he, took that extra step in shepherding his flock that way. He was shortly, I think it was about a year after after he stepped into his first parish, that he sat down and he wrote this poem entitled Silent Night. And this poem was written during the height of the Napoleonic Wars. And so this kind of goes back really even to, we poke fun at Silent Night and Away in a Manger. And although Away in a Manger does deserve it, it is interesting to know that this song that portrays peace, stillness, quiet, an absence of chaos was a rallying song in a way, a crying out during a time of war. And so again, even though we kind of have this like cheesy Silent Night might not necessarily be the most theologically accurate, historically accurate song out there, the intention behind it was to be a voice to bring music to this part of the good news of Christmas, that the Messiah is the ruler of peace, and there can be stillness and peace and calm when he saves us. Now let's look at O Holy Night. And remember how I said it came upon a midnight clear, the bonus track to that one episode about the angels appearing to the shepherd, how that is probably the craziest set of circumstances to get the song that we have now. Almost as crazy as Hark the Herald Angels sings. Yeah, O Holy Night actually is pretty up there by way of, oh, well, that's different. So here we go. O Holy Night was written by a guy whose name I am going to butcher, Placide Cappeau. It's French, so I'm pretty confident Cappeau is probably the correct pronunciation of his last name. I have no idea how to say that first name. He wrote this for a Christmas Eve service in 1847. Well, who was Cappeau? Who was this man? Was he a pastor of a church who had just come back from the trip to Bethlehem? Was he a minister who evangelized other continents? Who was he? A socialist. He was a socialist. He was an unbelieving socialist. He was a guy who wrote poetry in the church, who just wrote poetry, and the church went to him and said, hey, can you write us a poem for Christmas? And he wrote a French poem that was then translated later on, we'll get to that part, into O Holy Night. It gets weirder, by the way. We're going to keep going. So yeah, what I said earlier of this is probably the best Christmas song of all time. It's written by a guy who actually, we're not even really certain if he actually believed anything that he actually wrote here. He did say that he was very compelled by his own writings. Like by the time he had finished the song, this song that is very clearly also like a song that is calling for social justice, like a song that is calling for the ending of slavery, a song that is, very even existential at points. Thanks, French. He's a French writer after all. Yeah, we don't really even know if he actually ever fully believed anything that he actually wrote here, but he definitely was challenged by it. Eventually, in, I think it was 1855, he was actually so compelled by it. In 1855, he passed it along to Adolph Adams, an unbelieving Jewish person, a non-believing Jewish person, to write the music. So now we have an unbelieving socialist pass the poem along to an unbelieving Jewish person to write the music. When does this actually start to make sense? Plot twist, it never does, because eventually, this is a French song, if you recall. How did we get it in English? Well, thankfully, an American journalist and, you guessed it, Unitarian minister, there they are again. I don't quite understand the Unitarian faith. I've talked about this with my wife before. We've because there's a Unitarian church not far from us. I don't quite understand it. It's not a denomination of Christianity, but it's not necessarily a cult. But boy, howdy, they know how to do Christmas music. This Unitarian minister, let me get his name here, John Dwight, thankfully, an easy name. John Dwight, he picks up on the song a little while later and translates it into English. And that is how we get O Holy Night. And I know when we talked about It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, I was like, but hey, he's a conservative Unitarian minister who believed in the deity of Jesus. Yeah, this guy was a liberal Unitarian minister, so again, it's one of the greatest, all-time greatest Christmas hymns. This is the perfect way to end this series. One of the all-time greatest Christmas hymns was written by two guys, and translated by a third guy, who, quite possibly, none of them believed in Jesus. Just sit on that one for a minute. This song, because of its call for social reform and its presentation of the gospel, was actually banned in French Catholic France for a while. It did continue to be sung and was actually very popular among soldiers in World War I as well. One last note about the French version of this song is that apparently, although the English translation is pretty close to the literal French of this song, the French version actually has a more, I guess you could say, evangelical presentation of the gospel, whereas the Unitarian minister maybe turned it a little bit to a different direction in the gospel presentation parts. Now, to send this whole long conversation about peace, what is it? What does it look like to be, in the presence of peace incarnate, and how that changes us in reflecting on songs written during war, songs of calling for peace, written by people who maybe never truly knew the Prince of Peace. And to just send this whole series home, I want to, like I said, part of this was going to be the Christmas Eve service or the potential candlelight service, and it's fine that they chose not to do that. It's fine. This is I just play a specific role. But one thing I was looking at, I did not know this existed until after I started looking into trying to outline a special service. Dr. Maya Angelou wrote a poem called "Amazing Peace," and it's a poem about Christmas and the peace that comes at Christmas time. And I just want to take a moment and close us out by reading this, a part of this is a long poem, but reading part of this for us. We tremble at the sound. We are thrilled by its presence. It is what we have hoped for. Not just the absence of war, but true peace. A harmony of spirit, a comfort of courtesies, security for our beloved and their beloved. We clap our hands and welcome the peace of Christmas. We beckon this good season to wait while with us. We Baptists and Buddhists, Methodists and Muslims say, come, peace. Come and fill us and our world with your majesty. We the Jew and the Janus, the Catholic and the Confucian, implore you to stay a while with us, so we may learn by your shimmering light how to look beyond the complexion and see community. It is Christmas time, a halting of hate time. And with that, I think that is a good place to draw this episode and this series to a close. So thank you all for joining me throughout this journey with Hymns of Christmas. If you enjoyed this series and you haven't yet already, please consider rating and reviewing the show wherever you get your podcasts. Do that, please. And share this episode with a friend who maybe they need to take some time and reflect on peace and what that truly looks like. If you'd like to financially support the show, then head on over to buymeacoffee.com/MSLpod to make a one-time donation, join one of our support tiers, or you can head on to the description head down to the description to find a link to our shop where you can buy merch. That is it. Thanks again for listening. Next week on the show, even though we're 1 week into 4 days. We're 4 days into 2025. Next week on the show is going to be a 2025 preview edition of the show where I'm going to talk about the plans that I have for you, the plans that I've come up with. I've got about the first 6 months kind of mapped out. I'm going to talk about what that map looks like and then some of my ideas for what the rest of the year could look like. But until next time, this is Brandon signing off, reminding you as always that theology is for everyone, so keep on studying.